Hello, like mother, like murder listeners. I am Rachel.
And I'm Heather.
We are the hosts of Like Mother, Like Murder.
We bring you the good, the badass, and the crime.
Each week, we bring you stories from missing and murdered
to survivors and women who empower you.
And of course, some mom talk sprinkled in.
Check us out wherever you get your podcasts at Like Mother, Like Murder.
And give us a follow on social media so that we can say hi.
Okay, love you, bye.
Okay, love you, bye.
Welcome to the D.E.A.D podcast, where I discuss all things spooky and weird. I'm Desi, and today I'll be talking about the black-eyed kids. Let's get started. They might knock on your door on a late wintry night. You may see them approaching your car while you are waiting at the signal light or at a gas station. It might seem like they need your help, or they might just stand still for no reason. These children do not look threatening. They would want to get in your house or your car. They will be persistent. Suddenly, you will notice something is not right about these children. Their eyes, pure black from lid to lid, dead black orbs, devoid of sclera or iris, will chill up your spine. You have finally come across the black-eyed children. Black-eyed children, or black-eyed kids, is an urban legend of paranormal creatures that resemble children between the ages of 6 and 16. These creatures, with pale skin and black eyes, have reportedly been seen hitchhiking, panhandling, or at the doorsteps of residential homes. A dozen stories keep circulating, all following a similar pattern. Kids with eyes completely blacked out appear at people's homes or vehicles, knocking on the door and then insisting upon getting inside. Anyone who encountered them has almost immediately felt an overwhelming sense of dread. Besides blacked out eyes, these children typically appear normal. Sometimes their attire seems outdated. In extremely unusual instances, people have reported encountering creatures with talon-like feet. No one knows where or how these creatures pop up. Conspiracy theorists believe that black-eyed children are aliens trying to reach out to their Earth. Demonologists believe they are children of the devil himself, and if you let them in, you are allowing the devil to enter your life. They want to enter your home to call their parents. However, upon making eye contact, it seems like there is a much sinister plot to the story. Some people claim that these children have existed since the 1980s. However, most sources say that the legend originated in 1996 in posts written by a Texas reporter named Brian Bethel, where he wrote about 2 alleged encounters with the black-eyed children. He said that he encountered 2 children in Abilene, Texas, with pale skin and black eyes. In 2012, Bethel retold his story on the TV show Monsters and Mysteries in America. He then wrote an article for the Abilene Reporter News, where he described his experience again. This legend even crossed bodies of water and landed in the great land of the UK, where, in 2014, the Daily Star wrote 3 front-page stories about sightings of the black-eyed children in the haunted pub in Staffordshire. Ghost hunters who believed that the black-eyed children were extraterrestrials, vampires, or ghosts took these alleged sightings very seriously. Nowadays, people still claim to see the black-eyed children when driving late at night down an empty road or outside of their window late at night, or even lurking in the shadows of their room. Many people have reported seeing the black-eyed children standing in the corner of their room during their episodes of sleep paralysis, or even waking up in the middle of the night because they sensed someone was watching them, and in the shadows were these children. Now I will be discussing 4 supposed encounters with the black-eyed children. This first one is called You Must Let Me In. On March 17th, 2008, I had my one and only encounter with a black-eyed kid. Before my experience, I had never heard of anything having to do with the black-eyed kids. I was 12. I was sitting outside of a hairdresser's in an old Chevy pickup truck, waiting for my mom to get her hair cut. About 15 minutes had passed, and I saw some kid walking back and forth along the sidewalk in front of my parked car. At first, I thought I recognized him as one of my friends from school, so I banged on the front windshield until he looked my way. It was not anyone I knew. At this point, I was not scared at all. Not yet. The boy walked over to the side of my car and just stared. I think to let me get a good look at his eyes, to freak me out. And let me tell you, if you have never seen a black-eyed kid, you have no idea what to imagine. Pupils black as the night sky. The boy whispers, "You must let me in." And then I locked the car doors and ducked down in the space below the seats. 5 minutes later, he was gone. When my mother got into the car, she told me a boy with black eyes had came into the hairdresser's and had insisted for my mother to give him the keys to the car. She refused. Thank God she did. This next one is called Midnight Caller. It almost felt like a dream. I woke up to my dog Lucy barking. She was upright on the bed where my husband and I were sleeping with our 22-month-old daughter. Staring at our door like an unknown stranger was out there, rummaging around. I thought she was just freaking out over a house noise. We'd only had her for 3 months and she was still a puppy. It could have been anything. Our roommate, a creak in the house settling, the awnings moving outside in the breeze. I wasn't too concerned initially, and I figured it should work with the puppy too. I opened the door and she raced to the front door. She stood there snarling at the door. It was an angry, violent growl, one I had never heard her make before. I looked groggily at her, and I opened the baby gate, blocking the doorway, planning to open the door and show her everything was okay. The second my hand reached for the deadbolt, Lucy went wild. She started barking and jumping toward me, and when I touched the metal, she suddenly changed her temper. She whimpered, almost like she was afraid and backing down. As her mannerism changed, so did mine. I wasn't calm anymore. My heart was racing and sinking at the same time. I had been flooded with a mixture of fear and dread. I looked through the peephole. I can't explain why I looked, but I did. Outside were 2 kids. One was just a smidgen shorter than me and didn't look much younger. I'm 21, and she looked to be about 16 or 17. She was slender and pale. Her hair was a light shade of honey blonde, and she wore it long, about mid-back, with long, thin, blunt bangs in the front that covered most of her eyes. She wore jeans, a light wash that's popular right now, and a thin-looking, olive-colored pullover-style hoodie. She held the hand of a small girl, who looked to be about 3 or 4, in the same style jeans and a button-up ivory cardigan. The smaller one looked at the floor shyly, but had the same shade of hair tied back in a ponytail. She held a stuffed toy under her free arm, and it was identical to one my daughter has, as was their style of dress. Had it not been for that feeling of overwhelming dread and fear, I probably would have asked these children in and given them some tea or hot chocolate to get them out of the bitter cold. Something about them seemed off. At this point, I hadn't made any noise. I hadn't shushed the dog or grumbled. Nothing. I hadn't turned on any lights. These kids had no indicators I was at the door. The older one spoke. She had a voice that was mature, confident, strong, and accentless. She held her head tilted downwards, and I couldn't see her eyes. She said, "We have to use your phone." I stood frozen in fear. How did she know I was there? She raised her head to face me directly, and that was when I saw her eyes. There was a reason I couldn't see them through her bangs before. They were black, or midnight blue, or a dark, dark purple. They were otherworldly. She said, "Our mother is worried." As someone who has always been interested in creepy stories, I knew what she was the second she looked at me through the door. I have never been one to believe in these things, as a staunch atheist and skeptic when it comes to the paranormal. I had written off many a ghost story from friends and family members eager to tell their tale. I didn't believe it. Still, I couldn't rationalize my way out of this one. I was standing there with nothing but a thin wooden door between me and a black-eyed kid. There was no questioning what was right in front of me. I did not answer her. Slowly and silently, I backed away from the door. Lucy, still cowering at my ankles, she kept talking. "Just let us in, to use your phone." I took another step back, and with that step, the tone changed. At first, she seemed polite. When I took that step back, she became commanding, almost hostile. "We're not going to hurt you. If we wanted to do that, we would have broken in. I'll ask again. May we come in and use your phone?" Lucy snarled at the door, and I inched backward, though something inside me seemed to be pulling me back toward the door. It wasn't a physical pulling, so much as a subconscious need to go back and let them in. I got to my room, covered up the window, locked the door, and sat there in the dim light of the nightlight. I heard her call me back to the door once more, and then quiet. I didn't go back to sleep that night, and I haven't slept right since. I know from reading about them that black-eyed kids can't just come in without permission. I know they haven't hurt anyone, but I still fear I'll be the exception. When I told my husband, he said it was just a dream. He keeps telling me to forget it. But this lingering feeling of sadness, this dread when the house is silent at night, this fear of a knock at the door, this tells me otherwise. This third one is called Halloween. This is so funny. I'd never heard of black-eyed kids before my incident, so I came on here to post my story. And the first story I see is about a black-eyed kid. Weird. Let me preface this by saying I'm by no means a writer, just a domestic engineer living in North Texas. Also, I don't believe in the paranormal, ghosts, demons, aliens, whatever. However, I did have an event happen to me this Halloween. I have to admit, has me scratching my head. This is my first post on Reddit, and sorry to say, I'd never even heard about it until yesterday. I told my best friend about my incident, and she's an avid reader of No Sleep, and she told me if I didn't post it, she would. So here I am. Anyway, hope you like it. So it had been a slow trick-or-treat night in our neighborhood that evening, which is pretty odd in itself. We usually have kids from different areas dropped off in hours and have a constant parade at our door. That night, I'd say we'd had no more than 8 or 10 groups of kids come by the entire night. It was about 9:30 p.m., and my husband and I were sitting in our family room watching some of those ghost shows based on supposedly actual events. Like I said, I don't believe in that stuff, but I do like a good ghost story now and then, and it was Halloween after all. We hadn't had any activity at the door in over half an hour, and it was getting late. So we decided to turn the porch light off and let our dog Chloe out of her crate. Chloe is an American bulldog and is very docile. We only put her in her crate because we were afraid she'd try and get out to play with all the kids, and I didn't want to have to chase after her down the street. Also, we didn't want her to scare any of the kids because she would look a little intimidating to the younger kids. So I turned the outside light off, let Chloe out, and she followed me back to the couch and laid down at my feet. It was getting close to 10 p.m. when my husband decided he'd had enough fun for the night and was going upstairs to take a shower and get ready for bed. After all, it was Thursday, and he still had to get up early the next day. My teenage son was out with his friends at a local haunted house and wasn't expected back for another hour or so, so that left me alone on the couch with Chloe. Now, just because I don't believe doesn't mean those shows don't freak me out a bit. And being alone, now watching, I'd have to say I was kind of on edge, as it were. It wasn't long after I heard the upstairs water from the shower turn on when there came a light knock, knock, knock at the front door. My initial reaction was, what the hell, really? It's almost 10, go home. But soon, an uneasy feeling came over me. Why the knock? Our doorbell glows in the dark. Without the porch light on, it would be extra obvious to anyone there. I paused. I couldn't really just ignore it. Our front door has a big, beveled glass pane, and anybody right at the door could see in enough to see someone in the family room watching TV. It would be pretty rude for me to just sit there and not answer it. Knock, 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 again from the door. I glanced down at Chloe, and she was gone. My gaze followed her usual path to the front door, expecting her to be on her way there, as she normally does. Nothing. She wasn't there. I stood up to look around the room better and found her, crouching by the back door, like she was wanting to go out. However, she never asked to go out like that. She always comes and licks my hand or puts her head on my knee. This was totally out of character for her, and I have to say, heightened my anxiety. Chloe, great, I said. She just turned back to look at me like, hell no, lady, ain't moving. I yelled up to my husband, but if he was already in the shower, I knew there was no chance of him hearing me. Knock, knock, knock. About that time, a car drove down our street and cast enough light on the door to where I could see the silhouettes of two small children through the glass. I instantly felt relief. It was just some kids, probably a couple of neighbors on their way back home that wanted to stop by and show me their costume or something. I headed to the door and looked back to make sure Chloe wasn't going to follow. What a great watchdog, I thought to myself as she just sat there. I turned on the porch light when I got to the door, and sure enough, I could see through the glass that it was a couple of pretty small kids. A little late for such young ones, I thought, and I began to wonder about what kind of parents would let their kids run the streets that late at night. I only opened the door enough to see where I could block Chloe's escape if she decided to grow some balls, which was only about 2 feet. What struck me immediately as odd was the kids weren't wearing any costumes. They were in normal street clothes. Also, no customary trick-or-treat either. I began to feel very uneasy again. It was a girl and a boy. The girl to my left was older. I'd say about 11 or 12. I could tell she was blonde, but I couldn't make out any distinct features as our lights are from high above and on columns at the front of the porch. So most of the light was coming from behind them. I had not opened the door wide enough for any light from inside to hit them directly. The boy was younger and about a foot shorter, I'd say 8 or 9, and looked to have light brown hair. The girl, very politely, spoke up. "Ma'am, can we please come inside and use your phone to call our mom?" As she spoke, something in the pit of my stomach was telling me something was wrong. What kid, even at that age, doesn't have a cell phone of their own these days? I couldn't remember the last time I'd had anybody ask to use my home phone. Hun, don't you have a phone of your own you can call your mom on?" I asked. This was when things really got weird. Both kids turned to look at one another like they were going to say something to one another, but neither ever spoke. They both turned back to me, and the girl said, "Ma'am, my cell phone battery doesn't have any charge left in it. Can we please come inside and call our mother? We're alone out here, and my brother is scared." I have to admit, there were two competing feelings going on inside. The first, that of a mother's heart that wanted to help these two small children get to their mom. The other, a sinking fear in my gut that was keeping the other feeling at bay. It was then I noticed that during the short conversation, I'd already opened the door a few extra inches, which I was completely unaware of doing. I stopped. "Honey, why don't you give me your mother's number and I can call her myself?" Another pause, and they again looked at one another. After a short moment, they turned back to me, and the girl said, "Ma'am, my little brother has to use your bathroom. Can we please come inside while you call our mom?" And with that last statement, the little girl moved closer towards the door, like she was just going to walk on in by me. As she did, she stepped into the light coming from inside the house, and I got my first real good look at her. Solid, jet black eyes. That's all I could see. That motherly instinct was gone and replaced by terror I don't think I've ever felt in my life. I could feel every hair on my arm and back of my neck standing at attention. I closed the door to where just my face was able to stick out. The little girl stopped and again pleaded, "Please, ma'am, we're really scared and alone out here. We have to come inside. Please help us." Then, like on cue, both kids began to whimper and cry. That's when the fear took over, and I shut and locked the door. "I'll call your mom if you give me the number," I shouted through the door, "but I'm not letting you in my house." I could still see them stand there on the porch, just staring at me through the beveled glass pane. Part of me wanted to run upstairs to my husband, but the bigger part didn't want to lose track of where they were. That would have freaked me out even more to not know where they were. After what seemed like forever, but probably only a few seconds, I decided to call my neighbor that lives across the street. As I made my way to the side table by our couch to my phone, I glanced at the back door. Chloe was nowhere to be found. We later found her in the guest room under the bed. Okay, this last one is called Trick or Treat. This really freaked me out. Yesterday I noticed my neighbor hadn't put out all his Halloween decorations, lights, etc. The past 2 years I've lived next to him. He's gone all out for Halloween. I don't know him well. He's younger, single, but I know he likes kids. Not in a creepy way. His brother and sister-in-law and their kids are always visiting him, and he plays with his 3 young nieces and nephews out in the yard. So anyway, I got home from work and was walking up my driveway, and I saw him outside and said something like, "Hey man, you better get your Halloween stuff up, or that house up the street is going to beat you for the best decorations." He kind of smiles sheepishly and says that he's actually going to skip his house and says that he's actually going to keep his house dark this year and just put out candy. I asked if he was going out of town, but he said no. Something happened last year that really scared him. Now I was concerned for my own safety if some weirdos were coming around our neighborhood, which is a pretty safe neighborhood with tons of young families living here. So I asked him what happened. He said last year he had his brother's family over so that they could trick or treat in the neighborhood, since they live in an apartment complex that doesn't do much for Halloween. He had a bunch of kids come to the door, like always. His family took off around 10:30, and there were only a few older trick-or-treaters, but by 11:30 they were pretty much done. So he was inside watching TV, and the doorbell rings. He grabs the candy bowl and heads over, noticing that it's a little past midnight, and that's pretty rude for trick-or-treaters to still be out. But then notices he hasn't turned off all his decoration lights yet, so his house is still a beacon. He swings the door open and is about to yell, "Boo," or something to freak him out, but he stops dead when he sees the kids at the door. He said one was probably around 13 or 14, and the other around 16 or 17, both boys. They weren't dressed up, but he remembers the older one was wearing a flannel, checkered shirt. He was immediately overcome with uneasiness, like opening the door was a huge mistake. They just stared at him, and he noticed they had really big irises and dilated pupils. He couldn't even see the whites of their eyes, so he figured they were contact lenses. He was frozen there, holding the candy bowl, like he couldn't slam the door in their face as much as he wanted to. So he nervously tried to smile at them, hoping they would break character and ask for candy or something. The younger one said they had gotten lost and needed to come in and use his phone. That was when he closed the door more than halfway on them and said, "No, sorry." And the older one said something like, "Can we just wait in your house until our parents come pick us up?" But by then he was convinced that his life was in danger, and these kids must be high on something or intending to rob him, and he just kept mumbling, "No, sorry, good night," as he inched the door closed and locked it. He told me he was so fucking scared at that point that they were going to try to break in through one of his windows or something. But he looked through the peephole, and they had turned to leave. He watched TV with the volume really low so he could hear any sounds at all. And he stayed up till like 5 a.m. because he was too scared to go to bed and drop his guard. The whole time he's telling me this, I'm thinking, oh my god, this sounds so familiar, just like the Black-Eyed Kids urban legend. Then I thought, hey, maybe this dude is trying to scare me, because after all, he does have the Halloween spirit. So I'm looking at him incredulously, but trying not to seem too gullible. So I'm like, man, that is really crazy. Sounds like the Black-Eyed Kids. He just looks at me blankly. The what? Is that a movie or something? And I said no, but I told him to go look it up online. Like an hour later, I get a knock on my door, and admittedly almost jumped out of my skin, thinking it's a demon child. It was my neighbor, and his eyes were freaking huge. He swears to me up and down that he had never heard of the Black-Eyed Kids before, and it's so similar to what happened to him. So we talked a while longer, and I told him that quite a few people probably know about that urban legend, and it's possible it was just teenagers. With black contacts, trying to freak people out on Halloween, which would be genius, by the way. But he said the fear he felt was so primal and came over him the second he opened the door for them. Have you heard of the Black-Eyed Kids? Have you ever encountered the Black-Eyed Kids? Well, let me know. That brings me to the end of this episode. Thanks for listening to the D.E.A.D podcast. Please follow me on Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok at the D.E.A.D podcast. Also, feel free to send in your stories, episode suggestions, or feedback at the D.E.A.D podcast 1, or send me a DM on Instagram. If you enjoyed this show, please rate and review the podcast on whatever platform you are listening on, and be sure to come back next week for my next episode.